Mini Alien Girl feared the human would devour her. But things took an unexpected turn. Captain Arlen had been traveling through the galaxy for years, exploring unknown planets and discovering new life forms. His ship, the Horizon, was equipped for long journeys through deep space, and he had visited countless worlds. But today, he found himself on a planet that was unlike anything he had encountered before. The planet was covered in dense jungle, filled with towering trees and thick vines. Strange, colorful plants grew in every corner, and the air was thick with the scent of unknown flowers. As Captain Arlen stepped out of his ship, the ground beneath his boots felt soft and spongy. The planet's gravity was weaker than Earth's, making it easier to move around, but it also made everything feel a little strange. He had landed to gather samples of the plants and soil for research. The mission was simple enough, but as he explored further, something caught his attention. Small, glowing lights flickered in the trees around him. He thought it might be fireflies or some kind of insect, but when he looked more closely, he realized they were moving too quickly. Curious, Arlen knelt down and looked through the foliage. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw tiny, humanoid figures darting between the trees. They weren't like anything he had seen before. The creatures were no bigger than 6 inches tall, with delicate wings that shimmered in the sunlight. Their bodies were slender, and their faces were large and round, with bright eyes that seemed to glimmer with intelligence. At first, Captain Arlen thought he might be seeing things. His mission didn't mention any intelligent life forms on this planet, but the creatures in front of him were clearly sentient. They moved with purpose, their tiny feet carrying them swiftly through the jungle. They communicated with high-pitched clicks and musical hums that sounded like a song. Suddenly, one of the creatures, a small female, stopped in her tracks. She was the smallest of the group, and her wide, glowing eyes locked onto Arlen. She seemed to freeze in place, as though she was unsure of what to do next. Captain Arlen held his breath, not wanting to startle her. He slowly raised one hand in a gesture of peace, trying to show that he meant no harm. The little creature's eyes narrowed in fear, and she quickly darted behind a nearby bush, disappearing from sight. Captain Arlen, slightly confused but not wanting to push further, stood up and stepped back. He hadn't meant to frighten her, but he could tell she was terrified. He decided to continue gathering samples, hoping the creatures would soon realize he was no threat. However, the tiny alien didn't stay hidden for long. As Arlen moved deeper into the jungle, he began to notice that the little creature was following him. She kept a safe distance, peering at him from behind trees and bushes. Arlen couldn't help but smile. He was used to being alone in space, but this was different. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly not alone. The creature, whom Arlen had already started to think of as Lyra, was clearly fascinated by him, though she was also wary. Every time Arlen stopped to examine a new plant or take a soil sample, Lyra would get closer, her tiny footsteps nearly silent on the soft ground. She watched him intently, studying his every move. Despite her curiosity, Lyra didn't approach him. She stayed hidden in the shadows, always watching, always unsure of what the human might do. Arlen knew she was afraid of him, but he didn't understand why. He wasn't a threat to her. He wasn't even carrying weapons, only a scanner and tools to collect data. But to Lyra, he must have looked like a giant, a monster from her world. As he continued his work, Arlen began to notice more of the tiny creatures. They were all around him, moving through the jungle with quick, careful movements. The others didn't seem as curious as Lyra. They stayed in the background, watching from a distance, but Lyra seemed different. She was braver, more willing to come closer, even if it was only for a moment. Finally, after hours of observing, Arlen decided to set up a small camp for the night. He built a fire to keep himself warm and roasted some of the alien fruits he had collected earlier. As the fire crackled, he noticed that Lyra had gotten closer once again. She was now perched on a nearby tree branch, her large eyes glowing in the firelight. Her tiny body was so small that she looked almost fragile, but there was a sharp intelligence in her gaze that Arlen couldn't ignore. He knew that she must have been watching him for hours, trying to figure out who he was and what he wanted. She was clearly afraid, but her curiosity seemed to outweigh her fear. Arlen smiled softly and sat down near the fire, hoping to show that he meant no harm. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice calm and low. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to learn about this planet." "It's beautiful here." Lyra didn't move. She simply stared at him, still unsure of his intentions. Arlen chuckled softly, thinking she might not understand his words. "I guess you don't know what I'm saying, huh?" He continued to eat his meal, all the while keeping his eyes on her. After a few moments, Lyra hesitated before she fluttered down from her perch. Her tiny wings buzzed softly as she landed on a low branch close to him. She didn't come any closer, but she was no longer hiding behind trees. Arlen took it as a good sign. As the night wore on, Lyra remained close by. She didn't make any more attempts to hide, but she didn't approach him either. Arlen continued to eat and work, pretending not to notice her watching him. He hoped that, by ignoring her presence, she would feel more comfortable around him. Finally, as the fire began to die down, Lyra made a sound that Arlen had never heard before. It was a soft, melodic hum, almost like a song. He looked up, surprised, and saw that she was no longer hiding. Her large eyes met his, and for the first time Arlen saw something new: trust. He smiled at her, feeling a sense of connection. "I think we'll get along just fine," he said, his voice filled with hope. The following day, Captain Arlen awoke to the soft chirping of alien birds in the trees. The sun had just risen, casting a warm, golden light over the jungle. He stretched and yawned, still amazed by how different this planet felt from others he had visited. There was an unusual peace here, and despite the strange wildlife, he couldn't help but feel at home. Lyra was there again, perched on a nearby branch, watching him as he packed up his gear. She had been there the entire night, a silent observer, but something had changed. Arlen noticed that she no longer seemed to flinch when he moved or spoke. There was still a touch of caution in her eyes, but the fear that had been so obvious the day before was beginning to fade. After preparing a quick breakfast, Arlen decided to explore further. The jungle was thick with vines and large, twisting trees, but he had a map of the area from the ship's scanners. As he gathered his equipment and made his way deeper into the dense forest, he noticed Lyra following at a distance. This time she didn't hide behind trees or bushes. She was watching him, moving swiftly from one shadow to the next, keeping herself hidden but always within view. As Arlen trekked through the jungle, he came across more of the tiny creatures. They moved quietly through the underbrush, their glowing eyes peeking out from behind leaves and branches. Some of them seemed to be gathering fruits, while others appeared to be working on small, intricate tools made from natural materials. It was clear that these creatures had a deep understanding of their environment, living in harmony with the jungle. But still, Lyra was the only one brave enough to stay near him. Arlen smiled to himself as he continued. He wasn't sure what the little alien saw in him, but it was clear that she was becoming more comfortable. She had started to venture closer each day, though she always kept a safe distance. And despite all the things he had seen in the galaxy, there was something about the way she watched him that made him feel a strange connection. After a few hours of exploring, Arlen decided to set up a temporary camp in a clearing, just to take a break and eat. He pulled out some of the food from his supplies and began to make a small fire. The fire crackled and popped as he carefully arranged the logs, keeping the flames under control. He could feel the weight of the day's work in his muscles, but he didn't mind. This planet was fascinating, and he was eager to learn more about it. Lyra watched from behind a tree, her eyes glowing softly in the twilight. Arlen glanced up and saw her, but this time he didn't feel the need to be cautious. Instead, he offered her a small smile and he continued working as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice calm. "I'm making some food. You're welcome to stay." Lyra didn't move at first, but after a moment she cautiously fluttered down from the tree. Her tiny wings hummed softly as she glided to the ground, landing gracefully on a large stone nearby. She stayed there for a moment, watching him carefully. Arlen went about his work, pretending to ignore her, hoping that she would feel more at ease. She didn't approach, but she didn't leave either. It was as if she was testing him, trying to see if he would do anything unexpected. And Arlen didn't disappoint. He simply continued to prepare his food, completely ignoring her presence as if she were just another part of the jungle. It wasn't until he was finished that he turned to look at her. "Well, I guess I can't eat all of this myself," he said with a grin, holding out a piece of fruit. "Want some?" Lyra blinked at the fruit for a long time. Her eyes flicked between the food and Arlen, and for a moment Arlen wasn't sure if she would take it. But then, almost cautiously, Lyra fluttered closer and landed on the stone beside the fruit. She stretched out a tiny hand, her fingers delicate and graceful, and touched the fruit. Her touch was light, as if she were unsure about whether or not it was safe. Arlen watched patiently, giving her time. He had seen enough alien species to know that trust took time, especially when a creature had been scared. He wasn't in a hurry. If she wasn't ready, that was fine. He would let her make the choice. Finally, after a few moments, Lyra took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly, and a soft hum escaped her as she tasted the fruit. It seemed to be a positive reaction, and Arlen smiled. He had no idea what kind of fruit this was, but it seemed to be something she enjoyed. The tiny alien took a few more cautious bites before retreating to a nearby rock, sitting down to enjoy her meal in peace. For a while, they both ate in silence. Arlen couldn't help but notice how peaceful everything felt. He was surrounded by life, an entire world full of mysteries, yet in that moment he felt an unspoken connection with this tiny alien. It was as if they both understood something, even if they couldn't put it into words. When the meal was over, Lyra flitted around the camp, her wings fluttering softly as she circled the fire. Arlen watched her closely, still unsure what her presence meant. But as the evening wore on, he began to feel a sense of calm. Lyra wasn't afraid of him anymore, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see him as something more than a potential threat. Just then, something unexpected happened. A rustling sound came from the jungle beyond the clearing. Arlen froze, his senses alert. The sound was too heavy to be from a small creature. Whatever it was moving through the jungle with purpose. Lyra seemed to sense it too. Her small body stiffened and her eyes darted around nervously. Arlen stood up slowly, reaching for his equipment. He knew that the jungle could be dangerous, especially with unfamiliar wildlife. But he couldn't ignore the fact that Lyra was reacting more intensely than usual. She was scared. Without thinking, Arlen grabbed a small, glowing stick from his pack, a flare used for emergencies. He lit it quickly, the bright light casting a wide glow across the clearing. The rustling continued and Arlen's heart raced. Something large was out there. Lyra darted toward him, her small wings beating rapidly. She landed on a nearby rock, watching the jungle intently. Arlen crouched down next to her, his hand resting gently on her small shoulder. He didn't know what was out there, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let anything harm her. The rustling grew louder. Then suddenly, a massive shape emerged from the shadows. The creature that emerged from the shadows was unlike anything Captain Arlen had expected. Its massive form stood tall, much larger than Arlen himself, and its dark, scaled body shimmered under the light of the flare. It had long limbs, each ending in sharp claws, and its head was crowned with a set of intimidating horns. Its glowing eyes, though fierce, seemed to scan the surroundings with an intelligence Arlen hadn't anticipated. Lyra's wings buzzed in alarm, and she darted behind a nearby tree, peeking out from behind the trunk with wide eyes. She clearly recognized the creature as something dangerous. Arlen could feel her fear, and for the first time since he'd arrived on this planet, he felt an unfamiliar knot of tension in his chest. The creature took slow, deliberate steps toward the clearing, sniffing the air as it moved. It didn't seem to notice Arlen or Lyra yet, but it was clear that it wasn't just passing through. This was no ordinary predator. It was intelligent, and it was hunting. Arlen knew that he had to act quickly. He reached for his equipment, scanning his surroundings for any potential tools to defend himself. His first instinct was to reach for his blaster, but he hesitated. He didn't want to kill the creature unless he absolutely had to. It wasn't the Gilani way to harm others without cause, and he had already seen how beautiful and complex the ecosystem here was. But there was no time to waste. The creature was getting closer, and it was only a matter of time before it discovered the small alien hiding in the trees. As if sensing the danger, Lyra fluttered back into the open, her wings beating frantically. She hovered near Arlen, her eyes filled with terror. "Stay close, Lyra," Arlen whispered softly, though he knew she wouldn't understand. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way to get them both to safety. He couldn't outrun the creature, and there was no cover in sight. He needed to think quickly. Suddenly, a thought struck him. If he could scare the creature away, maybe it would back off without a fight. He had one option, his flare. The light was bright and blinding, and if he launched it in the right direction, it might disorient the creature long enough for him to escape. With a deep breath, Arlen turned to face the creature, holding the flare firmly in his hand. He raised it above his head, and with a quick motion, he hurled it toward the beast. The flare shot through the air with a high-pitched whistle before landing in the jungle, sending a bright, flashing light through the darkness. The creature hissed, recoiling from the sudden brightness. It blinked rapidly, its claws scraping against the ground in confusion. For a moment it seemed disoriented, but then it let out a deep, rumbling growl. Arlen could feel the ground shake slightly as the creature's claws dug into the earth, ready to charge. Lyra's tiny form zipped through the air, darting to the side as the creature turned its attention toward her. It was fast, much faster than Arlen had expected, and in that moment he realized the true danger they were in. If the creature caught Lyra, she wouldn't stand a chance. Without thinking, Arlen sprang into action. He grabbed the flare gun from his belt and aimed it at the creature, firing a second flare. The bright light exploded in a flash, right in the creature's face. The creature recoiled again, shaking its head in an attempt to clear its vision. Arlen could see the confusion in its glowing eyes, and for a brief moment it seemed to hesitate. That was when Arlen saw his chance. "Lyra," he shouted, his voice loud and urgent. "Get behind me." Lyra hesitated, her tiny wings beating rapidly, but then, sensing the danger, she darted toward Arlen. The creature growled in frustration, turning its attention back to the human. It was clear that it didn't want to retreat. Arlen had to keep it distracted. Thinking quickly, Arlen reached into his pack and pulled out a small, electronic device. It was a sonic emitter, a tool designed to create high-pitched sounds that could disorient creatures. He activated the device, and a sharp, piercing sound filled the air. The creature flinched, its claws twitching, but it didn't stop its advance. Then something unexpected happened. Lyra, who had flown to Arlen's side, suddenly let out a high-pitched, melodic hum. It was a sound unlike anything Arlen had heard before. It was soft at first, almost like a gentle tune, but then it grew louder, more urgent. Lyra's hum seemed to have a strange effect on the creature. The beast stopped in its tracks, its ears twitching. It turned its head, its glowing eyes locking onto Lyra. She hovered in the air, her tiny form vibrating with the energy of her song. The creature seemed mesmerized, its growls quieting as it stood frozen in place. Arlen watched in astonishment. He had never seen anything like this before. Lyra's song was beautiful, almost like a lullaby, and the creature was entranced by it. The longer Lyra hummed, the more the creature's posture softened. Slowly, it stopped growling and even took a step back, its claws no longer raised in attack. Arlen didn't know what was happening, but he wasn't about to question it. He moved slowly, careful not to startle the creature or Lyra, who was still singing. He reached down to grab Lyra, his fingers brushing the tiny alien's wings, but she didn't seem to notice. She was completely focused on her song. The creature, now calm, lowered its head, its glowing eyes still watching Lyra intently. It took a few more cautious steps backward, and then, as if satisfied, it turned and disappeared into the jungle. Arlen let out a long breath, his heart still racing. He had never felt such a rush of fear in his life, but it was over. For now. He looked down at Lyra, who had stopped humming and was now hovering beside him, her wings fluttering softly. She looked up at him, her large eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and something else, gratitude. "That was amazing," Arlen whispered, his voice barely audible. "You saved us." Lyra didn't respond with words, of course she couldn't, but her behavior spoke volumes. She flew close to Arlen and hovered near his shoulder as if to say, "We're safe now." Arlen smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. The creature was gone and they had made it through the danger. But as he looked out into the jungle, he knew that there would be more challenges ahead. This planet was filled with unknowns, and he was far from understanding all of its mysteries. But one thing was certain. He had made an ally in Lyra, and together they could face whatever came next. The jungle was eerily quiet after the creature had disappeared. Captain Arlen stood frozen for a moment, still trying to process what had just happened. His heart was pounding, and the adrenaline coursing through his veins made his hands shake slightly. Lyra hovered beside him, her tiny wings fluttering in the air, her eyes wide but calm. She had saved them both. Arlen glanced down at her, still in awe of her bravery and the power she had shown. He had never expected that the tiny alien would be the one to stop the creature, but somehow she had done it. It was clear now that there was more to Lyra and the Gilanis than he had initially understood. "Thank you," Arlen said softly, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Lyra gave a small, musical hum in response, her wings vibrating slightly as if acknowledging his words. She flew a little closer to him, and for a brief moment, Arlen felt a deep sense of connection. In that moment, they weren't just two beings from different worlds, they were allies. He had come to this planet alone, but now he realized he wasn't alone anymore. He had Lyra. After a few moments of silence, Arlen took a deep breath and turned his attention to the jungle around him. The danger had passed for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to come. This planet was wild and unpredictable, and he had no idea what other challenges lay ahead. "We need to keep moving," Arlen said, his voice steady and determined. "I don't know how long we've been out here, but we need to find shelter before nightfall. And we need to figure out what's going on with this planet." Lyra hummed softly, as if agreeing with him, and fluttered into the air. She led the way, her tiny form darting through the dense foliage. Arlen followed her, making sure to keep an eye on his surroundings. The jungle was still full of strange sounds, chirping creatures, rustling leaves, and distant roars of things he couldn't even begin to identify. But with Lyra by his side, he felt a strange sense of confidence. If anything else tried to attack, he knew that she could help them survive. After several hours of walking, the jungle began to change. The trees grew taller and more spaced out, and the air grew cooler. Arlen's feet ached from the long trek, and he could see that Lyra, though much smaller and lighter, was beginning to tire as well. He realized that they both needed rest, and they needed shelter. He scanned the area and noticed a small cave hidden behind a cluster of thick vines. It wasn't much, but it would offer protection for the night. "We can rest there," Arlen said, pointing to the cave. "It's not much, but it should keep us safe." Lyra hovered near his shoulder and chirped softly, as if giving her approval. She darted ahead to check the cave, her small form disappearing into the shadows. Arlen followed her inside, feeling the cool air of the cave settle around him. It was peaceful in here, nothing like the harsh, chaotic jungle outside. They had found a temporary refuge, and for now, that was all that mattered. As the night fell, Arlen unpacked some of his supplies and set up a small fire in the center of the cave. The flickering light cast long shadows on the walls, and the crackling of the fire was the only sound that filled the air. Lyra perched on a nearby rock, her wings folded neatly against her back as she watched him. Arlen glanced at her and smiled. "We've made it this far, huh? I didn't expect to be sharing a fire with a tiny alien, but here we are." Lyra hummed again, a soft melody that seemed to fill the cave with warmth. Arlen couldn't help but laugh. The way she interacted with him, so peaceful and calm, was so different from the way he had imagined. When he had first encountered her, he had been certain that she would be nothing more than a fearful creature, hiding from him. But now he saw her in a new light, as an ally, a companion. "I think," Arlen said thoughtfully, "that you and I might be the start of something important. We could learn so much from each other, you know. Maybe we can help your people. Maybe we can even protect your home from dangers like that creature." Lyra tilted her head to the side, her large eyes watching him with curiosity. She gave a soft hum, almost as if considering his words. Arlen felt a small sense of pride. He didn't know exactly how, but he believed that this unlikely alliance between a human and a tiny alien could lead to something bigger. Maybe he had come to this planet alone, but now he had a purpose. He had a friend. The next morning, Arlen woke early, his muscles stiff from the long trek the day before. He stretched and packed up his things, ready to continue his exploration. Lyra, too, was awake, her tiny eyes shining with energy. The fire had burned out during the night, but the sun had risen and lit the cave with a soft, golden light. The jungle outside was alive with the sounds of the day, chirping birds, rustling leaves, and distant roars. "We'll head out in a few," Arlen said, preparing his gear. "But first, let's see if we can find more of those fruits you like. You've been a big help, so it's only fair I return the favor." Lyra chirped in delight, fluttering into the air and circling around him. Arlen smiled at her enthusiasm and followed her out of the cave. They ventured deeper into the jungle, searching for food and gathering more information about the planet. The more they explored, the more Arlen realized just how much he had to learn. The Gialanis, despite their small size, seemed to be deeply connected to the jungle, understanding its rhythms and dangers in ways that humans couldn't even begin to comprehend. As the day passed, they encountered more strange creatures, some harmless and others more dangerous. But with Lyra by his side, Arlen found that he was no longer afraid. He had learned to trust her just as she had learned to trust him. Together, they were a team, an unlikely one, but a team nonetheless. By the time the sun began to set again, Arlen had gathered enough samples to send back to his ship. He had also made a discovery. He had found signs that the Gialanis had been here long before him. Ancient ruins, overgrown with vines, dotted the jungle floor. There were symbols carved into the stone, their meanings unknown, but their presence spoke volumes. The Gialanis weren't just inhabitants of this planet, they were its protectors, its stewards. And maybe, just maybe, the humans could help them protect it. "We're not done here yet," Arlen said, standing before the ruins with a look of determination. "There's more to this place than we thought, and I'm not leaving until I understand it." Lyra fluttered beside him, her tiny form perched on a nearby stone. She hummed softly, as if agreeing with him. The bond between them had grown stronger over the course of the journey, and Arlen knew that together they could face whatever challenges came next. The stars were just beginning to appear in the sky as Arlen set up camp for the night. He looked up at the twinkling lights above and felt a deep sense of peace. This planet was strange, dangerous, and unpredictable, but it was also beautiful. And now, with Lyra by his side, he felt ready to uncover its secrets. For the first time in a long while, Arlen felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. And with an unlikely friend, the adventure had only just begun.